Hello and welcome to another Wild Food UK video. This is another long one. It was all filmed on a foraging course day that I ran in September somewhere in the UK. I'm not telling you where, I'm afraid. It was private property, but it was a really special day, so I thought I'd share the footage with you guys. For any of you people that have been subscribing to the channel for a while, I do go over a fair bit of old ground in this video, but there are some new bits of information in there. For any of you subscribers who are a bit newer, this is kind of what you get if you come on a foraging course with Wild Food UK. This was such a special day that I didn't have space left in this video really for some really lovely things like giant puffballs and hedgehog fungus and some plants that we spoke about on the day. Otherwise this video would have been even longer than it is. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the day. Thank you to the group that were with me. They were great fun, and special thanks to Heather for the little cameo she puts in this video a bit later on. I hope you enjoy. Right, these mushrooms here are our first real gourmet mushrooms of the day. These are our first chanterelles of the day. We're going to find two different types of chanterelle today, which just that alone makes this a good foraging course, a good foraging day, because a lot of foragers are very happy just to find chanterelles. So these ones though, I'm even happier to find, because these are a much less common, or a less common variety of the chanterelle than our normal yellow chanterelle, the Cantharellus cibarius. There's I think 5 different types of chanterelle that we get in the UK that are of a similar ilk to this. This one is the Amethyst Chanterelle, so Cantharellus amethystius. But it's going to allow me to show you the key features of this whole group of mushrooms again, because all the chanterelles are good edibles, really good edibles. So this one has, as the name suggests, rather than being yellow all over like our normal famous chanterelle, this one has an amethyst coloured cap. And what's happened here is that cap, as it's dried out over the dry weather that we've had, has cracked. So it's got a sort of almost violet to amethyst tinge to the cap, and that's cracked now and dried out, so it's darkened up a little bit. That really is the only difference between this and the true chanterelle, Cantharellus cibarius, and culinarily they are treated exactly the same. Now this one, because of that colouring on the cap, is really safe, probably safer than the true chanterelle, because the true chanterelle has a few lookalikes. The false chanterelle being one that you might have heard of, and another one called the jack-o'-lantern, which is seriously poisonous, that you don't want to eat. But there's a way of telling that you've got one of the true chanterelles. Well, there's 2 ways really of telling that you've got one of the true chanterelles rather than one of the potential lookalikes, and I'll use this as a good example of what we call false gills. So if I start off over here, the gills are all wavy and they look more like wrinkles in the skin of the mushroom under the cap, unlike the gills, the bladed gills that you saw on our parasol and on the mushroom portobellos and things that you get from the shops. So the gills are all wavy and wrinkly, and they look almost more like folds in the skin under the cap. Now that is true of all of this group of chanterelles, the pale chanterelle, the true chanterelle, the amethyst chanterelle. They all have those false gills. So that's an identifier of the group. Now, more importantly, and probably more easily used as a key identifier, is the fact that all of the lookalikes, they're yellowish or orangey, but they are the same colour all the way through the mushroom. Whereas our Cantharellus cibarius, the true chanterelle, this one, the amethyst chanterelle, and all the other ones in this group, they're yellowish or pale on the outside, but they have pure white flesh. Whereas the flesh on the false chanterelle and the jack-o'-lantern, which you're lucky to find, really, the jack-o'-lantern. Not lucky if you eat it, obviously, but if you like mushrooms, it's a good one to find. The flesh on our true chanterelles is white in the middle. They also, if you've got a very good nose, have a smell that I have trouble picking up unless I've got a bag full of them, but other people get it quite easily, so I'll pass this round. People say they smell a bit fruity, and particularly of apricots, but I find it hard to discern that. I've got quite a good sense of smell.
Can't get that.
You definitely get it if you've got a whole bag full of fresh chanterelles. There's kind of a fruitiness comes from the bag, which is another little identifier, I suppose. Now, culinarily, these are one of the most sought after mushrooms on the planet. They have a lovely, lovely flavour. They're useful for any mushroom dish that you might already do. Use chanterelles instead. I particularly like pickling chanterelles. I'm not really that into pickling mushrooms and things, but pickled chanterelles are lovely because they have a sweetness and a firmness to the texture of the mushroom and the taste of the mushroom, which works really well with pickles. So they're one of the few mushrooms that I will actually pickle. In Europe, they pickle lots of different mushrooms. It's not really my thing, but pickled chanterelles are a treat. They're a winner, and there's a recipe for that on my website. You just need to go and have a look. But probably my favourite thing about the chanterelles is that they contain an insecticide. So when you find a big patch of chanterelles, even the giant ones, there's barely ever any hint of a maggot in them. Whereas, you know, you get big porcinis and lots of other edible mushrooms, when they get big and fully mature, they'll have maggots inside, because we share all these things with nature, obviously. But chanterelles, you don't ever have maggoty ones, so you can just pick them all, or obviously, as I said at the beginning, we always leave half behind. But with chanterelles, you can pick the biggest ones and the nicest, huge-looking ones. Whereas normally, when we're picking mushrooms, we tend to leave the biggest, most mature or over-mature ones behind because they're more likely to be maggoty. And we leave the smallest ones behind because we want them to open up and drop a few days' worth of spores, which could be a few 100,000 spores, by the way. So we want them to open up, so we leave the babies, we leave the big giant ones, and we go for the sort of middle-aged looking mushrooms. With chanterelles, you just pick whichever ones are closest to you or nicest or biggest, and you never get any problem with maggots. So chanterelles, they're a real winner. This is the Amethyst Chanterelle, which is an unusual member of the group and a really, really lovely one to find. So any questions on the chanterelles? Anyone here ever found or eaten a chanterelle before? No? Oh well, you're in luck today because they're on the menu. So you'll get to taste them today. Yeah, sure. Yes, I did, but I've been here for a few years running mushroom courses, and mushrooms grow in the same place. Like I said in the talk at the beginning, they live underground, so they don't run away. They just fruit in the same place each year, and when the season's right, or when the environment is right, so they need the right kind of temperature levels and moisture levels, and then they'll fruit. So I've seen these chanterelles here in years gone by, and what I did when I first got here was go to where I know all the best mushrooms grow, check that they were around, and then have a little look around afterwards. Sometimes none of them are up, and then you have to run around frantically looking in every other part of the woodland to try and find some things, but that's not what happened today, believe me. So yeah, chanterelles, this is a really, really lovely start. But I did mention looking for environments. Obviously you find where mushrooms grow and you know to go back there. But really, as a forager, there's some really useful tips I can give you now about trees and environments, which will make all your mushroom foraging a lot more successful. So mushrooms, these types of mushrooms, and the majority of the really good edible mushrooms that we go for, they're what we call mycorrhizal fungus. I call them the feeders, and I'll get back onto them in a second. There's really three groups of mushrooms that we go for. So first of all, there's the parasites. There's a few parasitic mushrooms that we'll eat. Parasitic explains itself. Then we've got the saprobic mushrooms, or the saprophytes. They're what I call the rotters. They're things like oyster mushrooms that get into old dead wood and they eat that wood and fruit out of that wood for a good few years, and they turn that wood back into compost, which makes the whole environment more healthy. They are a fundamental part of a healthy woodland. They are so important because there's something called lignin in wood that only mushrooms really can break down in nature. There's a few other things, but it takes a long time. Mushrooms break down the wood. Otherwise, when you walk around in woodland, there'd be bits of 100-year-old wood dotted around all over the place and on all the paths. If it wasn't for mushrooms, turning them back into nutrition, they'd be wasted effectively. Now the third group is those mycorrhizals, the feeders. They're the ones that they live underground, and underground they're kind of like this three-dimensional spider's web, which is called mycelium. It's made up of little tubes called hyphae, and it can be sometimes just circular, sometimes in a line called a troop, and sometimes they're just a big mat of this mycelium. But that mycelium with these mycorrhizal fungus, the feeders, it has to join on to a host organism to be able to survive. That's the organism, by the way. The mycelium is really the organism, not this here, it's just a fruit. So that mycelium has to latch on to a tree or a plant, and that tree or plant's root system to be able to survive, because they can't hunt, they can't photosynthesize because they're underground. They have to form a symbiotic relationship called a mycorrhizal relationship with a host. And what they do is they then feed that host. They'll tap into underground through the mycelium nutrient resources that the tree just can't get to. So they can feed the tree extra nutrients, and mushrooms can break down rocks and get minerals and things to give to the tree that the tree just can't get. This is all new science. It's amazing. It might sound a bit hippy-trippy, but it's all perfectly proven now by mycologists and botanists. And then what happens is, in return, the tree gives the mushroom back what it needs to survive. So it's a two-way relationship which benefits both organisms. And again, this is fundamental to the health of our forests and woodlands, these mycorrhizal fungus. There was a programme actually, A Year in the Life of an Oak Tree, by it was on the BBC, that their entomologist, George McGavin, did it, and he studied an oak tree for a year, and during one part of the year they 3D mapped the root system of the oak tree, and it went, I think they said it was laid end to end. The roots of the oak tree would have gone on for about 5 miles, it might have been 10 miles, which is quite impressive. They also somehow, with their geophys techniques, 3D mapped the mycelium that was attached to that oak tree's roots, and they found it would go all the way around the planet. That's how much extra root matter, I suppose you could almost liken it to, the mushrooms give to the trees that they attach to. Now those mycorrhizal fungus, this is the bit for foragers. That was just a little bit anecdotal. The bit for foragers is that those mycorrhizal fungus are fussy. They only go with certain trees. Well, most of them are quite fussy. Some of them are a bit slutty. They'll just go with any old tree. But most of them seek out a specific tree to grow with. And in the UK, there's a few trees that are head and shoulders above the rest for edible mycorrhizal species. So number one in the UK for edible mycorrhizal species is the beech tree, which is over there. Very closely followed, and probably almost identical really, by the oak tree. They're very closely related, the beech and the oak. After that, the third most edibles grow with grass in Britain, and then it's the birch tree. So if you're out looking for mushrooms in autumn, then what you want is woods that are full of beech and oak and birch with grassy bits, and preferably lots of this moss, because chanterelles seem to have some three-way relationship going on, which has to include moss as well, and so do certain other good edibles. So mossy beech, oak and birch woodland with grassy bits, that's where you're likely to find the most mushrooms. After that, you've got things like chestnuts and fir trees and so on down the list. It's good to know what's at the top. It's also really good to know what's at the bottom, because if you're in a wood full of ash trees in autumn looking for edible mycorrhizals, you're not going to have much luck at all. Below them you've got your rhododendrons and laurels, which are rubbish for mushrooms, and below them you've got your whole maple family of trees, which again are rubbish for mushrooms. And firmly at the bottom with...
Sycamore, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. The sycamore is firmly at the bottom. As far as I know, it has no edible mycorrhizal species in the UK whatsoever. So what that means as a forager is simple. If you're in a wood full of sycamore looking for mushrooms in autumn, you are in the wrong place. Go somewhere else. Go and find a wood that's full of beech and oak and birch and a few fir trees and a few other broadleafs. and moss preferably, and some grassy bits, and that's where you're going to find the widest variety of edible mushrooms. Some don't grow with those trees, you know, the winter chanterelle, you need to find coniferous forests for those, but variety, look for the beech and oak and birch and moss. I'm pretty sure that of this particular species, this is the largest and stoutest one I have ever seen. So it's a bit of a specimen species, this one. Specimen of the species. So what we've got here, you'll all need to come in closer, I'm afraid, because I want you to see this. Now, I've dug around the base a bit already, and this is a very important little lesson I'm going to give you here now, because this mushroom is in the same genus as the death cap. So I'm going to give you some of the features to look out for here on the most poisonous, or reputedly the most poisonous group of mushrooms that we've got in the UK. I'll get to that in just a second. No, it's fine. It's a good question. This is one of that family. Not all, or one of that genus, and not all of that genus is poisonous, but I can use this to show you some of the key features of them. Now, you probably all know that red mushroom with white spots on the cap, the one that every gnome sits on, the fly agaric. That's another member of this genus, and quite a lot of them, the Amanitas, that's what we're looking at here, have those speckles on the cap. The speckles might be on a dark capped mushroom. I'm going to show you one of those in a little while, or it might be on a yellow or a red cap mushroom like the fly agaric. The death cap is a kind of green to white mushroom, and it has little flecks of like papery stuff on the cap. That's because it grows from that egg sac. All of them grow from that egg sac that I showed you when we were looking at the giant puffball. And what the speckles on the cap, or the remains on the cap, are with those is the remains of that egg sac, the vulva that it grew through, or the universal veil that covered the whole mushroom. That's what those speckles are. Now, this one doesn't have those speckles on the cap. This is in a little sort of side group of those Amanitas called the Grisettes. And there's one difference really between the Grisettes and the rest of the Amanitas and the poisonous Amanitas. But other than that, and I'll tell you what that is, they all have the same characteristics. Now, if you do not know what a mushroom is, you have to get to the very base of the mushroom, because some of the key identifiers, particularly with the Amanitas, are at the base of the mushroom. And sometimes the base of the mushroom can be an inch underground or so. So what you have to do to get to the base is you have to get your knife into the ground about an inch away from the mushroom and kind of lever it up and out. And then, wow, this is such a good example of this mushroom. This mushroom is called the Tawny Grisette, Amanita fulva, and in the ground there, left, you can see the remains of that egg sac that it grew from, and as I dug it up, you can still see those vulval remains around the base. Now, the grisettes, and this one in particular, are known to have a particularly long egg cup, if you like. It's, as you can see, this one is incredibly long, going halfway up the mushroom, but normally it would be visible and long and tubular around the mushroom like that. That's one key feature of the Amanitas. The next one is that they all have white gills. There's a couple that have got slightly off-white gills, but they all have white or whitish gills. Now the grisettes, this group of the Amanitas, have two little features. First is that you can see these striations or grooves around the edge of the cap. They're not normally visible on the rest of the Amanitas. And the grisettes are the only ones in the group that don't have a skirt. So if this was a death cap or a destroying angel, there's some really funky named mushrooms, they would have a skirt on the stem. This one's the Tawny Grisette, and it is a pretty good edible in all honesty, especially one this big. But it's not a mushroom for beginner foragers because it's in that group of deadly, or it's in the same family as some of those deadly mushrooms. Now, I'll just use the book again to show you those Amanitas. You've already seen the death cap, and there's the remains on the papery remains you get from the vulva on the death cap. There's the egg it grew through from, and you can see on that picture there the death cap has a skirt. Yeah, on the stem. Now that skirt is quite loosely attached on the death cap though, so it can brush off, you know. There's the destroying angel, the white version, just as deadly as the death cap. See, it grows from an egg sac. It'll have a ring on the, there's the egg sac there, very clear, and it'll have a skirt on the stem and white gills. And then the ones that you might recognise, there's our, where is it? There's our fly agaric. The famous red one with white spots. Technically it's a toxic mushroom, but it is probably consumed in most university campuses most weekends, if you know what I mean. And then there's a bunch of others. One of them, in fact, I'm not going to show you that because there's one of them on the course a little bit later on. But what we've got here is the tawny funnel, the tawny funnel, the Tawny Grisette, Amanita fulva, which is tawny in colour. That's why it gets that name. Now this is going to go in the mushroom bag today, but I'm using it as an example of the key things as novices to look out for. And they are any mushroom that comes from an egg sac and has those remains around the base, speckles on the cap, which you saw in the photos but not on this one, white gills, and very often a skirt on the stem. But the death cap, like I say, the skirt's only loosely attached and it can come off through natural causes. So that's what makes this one really not for beginners, because it could be a death cap where the skirts come off, if you like. But you're with me, Jordan and Attila today, so this one is going in the bag. There you are. Right. What I've got here is the true chanterelle, the Chanterelles subarius. Now, I mentioned when we were looking at the Amethyst Chanterelle that there's a few key features that all of the good edible chanterelles in this little group have. So, what was the first one I showed you?
Amethyst.
False gills, exactly. So the wrinkles or folds, and this is a really good example of that. Just on the edge of the cap there. You can see they don't look like gills at all around the edge of the cap. They do look very much just like a bit of wrinkly skin. Right there. And there you go. And then there was one other really simple key identifier that rules out your jack-o'-lanterns and your false chanterelles. So who else was listening?
White on the inside.
White on the inside. Wow, only a few people. Oh dear, repetition is key. So we will repeat this a few times. Chanterelles, the true chanterelles, they have false gills that look like wrinkles. And when you cut them in half, this is quite an old one, so even at this age, I just want to show you, the flesh of the mushroom is white. If this was one of the toxic lookalikes for the chanterelles, it would not have false gills and it would have flesh on the inside of the mushroom a similar colour to the outside. Please don't forget these rules because, you know, the jack-o'-lantern is known as a potentially deadly poisonous mushroom. And that's a lookalike for this. So simple rules, wrinkles and white flesh. Stick with those and you'll be absolutely fine. In fact, you'll be more than fine. You'll be a really really happy forager like me today, because these are very sought after mushrooms. And like I said before, they all have that insecticide, so even this older one, which is still quite small, it's just clear from the way that it's grown that it's matured quite small. They get 5 times as big as this, I've seen them. So yeah, white flesh and fake gills, false gills. So there we go. We now have 2 types of chanterelle in the bag, and a Tawny Grisette, and some hedgehog fungus from the beginning, and a giant puffball. That would normally make any mushroom forager happy just by itself, but we've got even better in store. So let's head this way and identify mushroom. Like I say, really common, really easy to identify itself, but more importantly, this mushroom is going to allow me to teach you a few rules that will open up probably about 50 mushrooms to you. Remember the puffball rules? I said that gave you about 17 or 18 that you can pick safely. What I tell you about this mushroom is going to help you pick a lot more, and some of the best as well. So, can anyone tell me anything unusual about this mushroom?
It's got no gills.
It's got no gills, no. It's got this spongy underside to the cap. Pores. And as a forager, we can lump all of the mushrooms that grow out the ground with a stem and a cap, not growing out the side of a tree or out the side of a potato or something like that. There is one that does that. If it's growing out the ground with a stem and a cap, and it has sponge under the cap, as foragers, we kind of treat them all as the wider Bolete family. Now, if there was a mycologist anywhere around here, he'd probably be hopping up and down right now going, that's not the Boletus family, that's 28 different genre of mushrooms. We've been splitting that up for years now, Marlo. But that doesn't matter to a forager, because we can still apply the same rules, even though they've unravelled the DNA of these mushrooms and realised that they're not related. People have been foraging for hundreds of years safely with the rules I'm about to teach you. And with this group of mushrooms, the ones with sponge under the cap, growing out the ground with a stem, the rules are so simple. No red, no blue. That's it. All of the toxic ones in this group have red pores or orange to red pores and a red stem. And all of the ones that are toxic or mildly toxic will stain vividly blue when you cut them in half. Now, again, like the Grisette that we just looked at, and I'm going to show you that in a little while. It's these aren't subtle rules I'm giving you, these are beginner rules, because the ones that are red, they are clearly red. And the ones that stain blue, I'll show you it, I think. We did find some red ones that stain blue, didn't we? Yeah? So I'll show you that in a minute. But they're not subtle about it. The red is obvious and the blue staining is obvious. Now, like the Grisette that we were just looking at, this is in a little side group of the Boletales, if I'm allowed to say that in front of Attila. This is in a side group called the Lexinums, and all of the Lexinums in the UK are edible, just like all of the Grisettes in the UK are edible. And you can tell you've got a Lexinum because they have this sort of, what they call floccules, I think, this kind of dirty, scurfy covering to the skin of the stem. So whenever you see that, that's natural, that isn't dirt that's blown onto it. That's how, oh, that's what the stem of any of the Lexinums look like. So that dirty bit there. The rest of it's been eaten off by a slug or something like that, or I've brushed it off with my fingers just now. But all of the Lexinums are edible. Attila actually really likes them. I find this one, the brown birch bolete, that's what this is, Lexinum scabrum, grows with birch trees, as the name would suggest, and quite a lot of them do. I find this when you cook it fresh, like a you know, a fried mushroom, I find it a little bit disappointing in flavour. But when you dry this mushroom out and use it as a flavouring in dishes, it's quite a strong, pungent flavoured mushroom. The thing is, you can use the cap in your dishes, but if you use the stem in like a stew, I'd advise removing the stem at the end of cooking, because after drying and using them, a bit like a bouquet garni, you know, take it out, because the stems can remain quite leathery. Some people will like that, but for me, I remove the stems of dried lexinums that I put into dishes. I put them into the flavouring. One other thing, the best one in this little group, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we're all unique, we've all got our own taste buds, but there's the orange Birch Bolete, which is a bright orange capped version of this. Looks exactly the same, except the cap is bright orange, grows with birch trees. That's my favourite one of the lexinums, with that dirty, scurfy stuff on the stem. That one's really, really tasty. I'll happily fry that one up. There's an orange oak bolete as well, and the slate bolete was one that I think Attila particularly liked. So there's quite a few of these with that scurfy stem, and in the UK, like I say, all of them are edible. There's one bit of it that I don't like to eat, and that's the sponge. So there's two reasons that I do this, but first of all, we can remove the sponge of the lexinums quite easily, and in that sponge, any viable spores that the mushroom has created. So what you want to do, just look out the nearest birch tree, which is over there, and chuck your sponge around the woods towards other environments, and who knows, it's not likely, because they're very unsuccessful at procreating, but there's a chance that by doing that you might help the mushroom fulfill its germination process, if you like. So chuck those around. The two reasons with this particular mushroom: one, I'm giving a bit back, even if they don't spore, the you know, invertebrates and things will eat that. But also, that's not the tastiest bit of the mushroom from a culinary point of view. So get rid of it, leave it in the woods, and you never know. Maybe next time you come back, there'll be some more lexinums growing there. Anyway, I tested you on my rules with the chanterelle, and you were a bit hesitant in coming forward with them when I did. So remember this, because this is the beginner family. If you branch out foraging for mushrooms, you branch out from the really easy ones like the hedgehog fungus and the giant puffball I showed you at the beginning. The first big group you branch out into as a forager are these, the ones with sponge under the cap. Because there's, I think, probably about at least 80 or so in the UK, and most of them are edible. The most toxic one, I think, is called the Devil's Bolete or the Satan's Bolete, because it's red. And you will, if you follow my rules, which were, who can tell me?
No red, no blue.
Absolutely. If you follow my rules, no red, no blue. You'll leave behind all the toxic ones. You will leave behind a couple of really nice edibles, but you'll also leave behind all of the toxic ones as well. So this is a basic rule that will keep you safe and allow you to forage for about 50 different species of mushroom in the UK. And in amongst those 50 species are things like the world famous Porcini mushroom and the equivalents of that, which as foragers we know, things like the Bay Boletus and the Boletus pinophyllus and the Boletus appendiculatus. These are all other members of this group that just don't have the Porcini name, but they're just as good as edibles as the Porcini. So remember that. No red, no blue. As long as it's a mushroom with a stem growing out the ground with sponge under the cap, that's all you need to know. No red, no blue. And you might have a Porcini. There you go. Right, we'll head up the hill now and see what else we can find. Ox tongue fungus. Don't know if any of you have ever been licked by a cow, but their tongues are quite rough and the surface on the top of the mushroom's a bit like that, and it looks a bit like a cow's tongue, so ox tongue fungus. The other name we have for it, the other common name, is beefsteak fungus, and I'll show you why in just a second. Its scientific name is Fistulina hepatica. Hepatic because it looks a bit like a liver. Now, what this does, and I'm not even going to have to cut it with this one, to turn it into beef, or to give it the name beefsteak fungus, is look, it's bleeding red all over the place. Like a bit of steak wood. Look at that, big drop of blood just came out there. Now, there's, I don't know how many polypores there are actually in the UK, but there's only 3 really that we eat. Now, when I say polypore, I mean bracket fungus really, ones that don't have a stem that come out the side of a tree. There's only really 3 that we eat. This one, the beefsteak fungus, another one called chicken of the woods, and another one that grows around the bases of trees called the blackening polypore. And the reason we eat those 3 really is because they're soft. There's loads of other polypores that aren't poisonous, but they're like bits of wood. You know, you'd need proper dinosaur gnashers to get through them. That's why they're inedible, if you like. There's only one poisonous polypore in the UK. It's called the cinnamon bracket, and it's a cinnamon coloured bracket, as you would expect. And it's a lot drier and firmer than our beefsteak fungus and our chicken of the woods, the soft ones that we go for. So one thing you can do with this is have a little taste. Do you mind me?
Go for it. Eat as much as you like.
Thank you. Right. So you can make little bits of beefsteak carpaccio with this mushroom. I'll just cut it to show you. It should look like, well, towards the edges you can see it will go that same colour all the way through as it matures, but it looks like a bit of marbled Wagyu beef.
Oh yeah.
Almost. And I'll cut this one for any brave people to have a nibble. You take that one and pass it round. The top's a bit squidgy. Right.
I like it.
It's got a bit of an unusual
like
flavour.
Marmite people, isn't it?
It is a bit like that. So who wants to taste a tiny bit of beefsteak fungus? There we go. A little bit of beefsteak carpaccio.
You can make a good pate.
Would you like some?
I like it.
I've got coming in at once.
Oh, you got a little bit of the bleeding bit as well. So it's got an unusual, I think it's a bit acidic, a little bit fruity almost. The flavour is not mushroomy, it's weird. But it does go really nicely in creamy sauces. It does not in any way taste like a bit of beef or ox tongue. Oh, you've done this before, Jordan. We've been having far too much fun talking about edible mushrooms. So I feel it's only good and proper that I show you a poisonous one. And right here we've got one of the most common, potentially deadly mushrooms in the UK. And it's this one growing here. It's quite a good example of it. It's a mushroom that's called the brown roll rim. Remember I said that I find our British common names really useful because they're quite descriptive. So it's a brown mushroom and the rim rolls under. Nice and simple. You can see that there. Brown and the under rolled rim. Now when this fully matures, that rim will unroll. I'll just see if that's happened on the edge of this. Well, you can see it's almost unrolled there. So you can't really use that rim, the rolled rim, as an ID feature for the really mature ones. One thing I always do with these when they're unrolled, and if you're not sure, although I am most of the time anyway, is if you squidge the gills, they almost immediately just start to discolour a darker brown wherever you've touched them. Now this is a mushroom which raw is certainly potentially deadly poisonous, but in parts of Europe they still eat it after they've boiled it, thrown the water away, and then with this one they pickle it. I think it's a particularly famous dish in Poland, is pickled brown roll rims. And we unfortunately, to the detriment of the only mycologist that I know of who died from mushroom poisoning, we now know that even after it's been boiled and pickled, this is still a potentially fatal mushroom, but it's a cumulative effect, the poisoning. So Julius Schaefer, who was big in the ruscular world of mushrooms and many others, he loved pickled brown roll rims, and he died one day, and they figured out that it was because of the cumulative effect of the pickled brown roll rims he was eating. And what happened was one day his immune system decided to attack his own red blood cells, and he died of something called immunohematological anemia, which is as bad as it sounds. So my advice is don't eat loads of pickled mushrooms if you go to Poland, just in case. And certainly remember this one, because you'll see loads of them around. They're extremely common. You see them in vast quantities, and every year we get, you know, hundreds of emails at this time of year from people trying to get us to ID mushrooms for them. And we certainly at this time of year get a really high percentage of these in those emails from people saying, this looks like a really tasty mushroom, can I eat it? And obviously the answer is very firmly no. So the brown roll rim, Paxillus involutus, not a mushroom that you want to eat. Any questions? Let's head up the hill then.
I noticed that you're quite happy to handle them and all the rest of it.
Yeah, there is no danger in handling poisonous mushrooms. I have licked a death cap in front of people before, and if this wasn't so manky looking, I'd happily give this one a little lick right now. The only way you're going to poison yourself really from a mushroom is by ingesting a reasonable amount of it, you know, more than just a tiny little nibble anyway, even of the death cap mushroom or of this mushroom. And I would quite happily touch the death cap and then eat a packet of crisps without even thinking about washing my hands. It's not something I really advise, you know. A good practice would be to, once you've finished foraging and before you start cooking, wash your hands. You'll all be pleased to know I'm going to do that before I cook for you today. But really, from a poisoning point of view, it's not an issue for me to touch this mushroom and then go and touch other things. Nice. There are plants that I would never ever touch though. The one you might have heard of called giant hogweed. You know, just touching that can put you in hospital. So to me, plants are more scary than mushrooms. Honestly, giant hogweed. If you see it, you have to report it to your environment agency, and if it's anywhere that kids play, then you probably want to dress yourself up in some hazmat suit and go and get rid of it yourself, because it's got this really severe phytophototoxicity, which means that if you touch the plant, your skin has, or basically it burns really easily. It removes your skin's protection from UV radiation. So if you get the sap of giant hogweed on your skin and it's even a mildly sunny day, you'll blister severely. And
it's
that
the
can,
tall one,
yeah. Great looking plant.
Oh, right up there.
They grow to 4 metres, maybe even taller. I'll include it in the notes, the course notes for you, so you know about the plant. But yeah, so there's plants you can't touch, but there's not a mushroom that you can't touch. Let's head up there. Okay, so we're going to talk about these little white mushrooms, I think, first. So, come on over, everyone. All right. Are we all nearly here?
Some here that have been squashed.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Now, this is a mushroom that I find quite exciting, to be honest. It's exciting for a few reasons. First of all, when I was first foraging for mushrooms, I don't know, 25 years ago or whatever it was, all the books had this mushroom in as an edible with a very, very strict warning that there are potentially deadly poisonous lookalikes for it. And then you look through those books and you find that, yeah, there are a lot of toxic mushrooms that look like this one. So I honestly must have been foraging for mushrooms for maybe 10 or more years before I worked up the courage to eat this mushroom. I'm saying that, I'm pretty sure it's the mushroom. I'll do the test in a second. It did take me a long time to work up the courage to eat this mushroom. I'd identified it numerous times, honestly numerous times, but I always follow that rule. You know, if you're not totally comfortable, then don't eat it. It's not worth potentially poisoning yourself for a mushroom. But one day I did work up the courage of my convictions and I ate it, and for me it's one of the tastiest around. It's called the Miller, or at least I hope it is, and I can only tell really by smelling it. Yes, it's the Miller. Now the Miller looks very much like one of the most poisonous mushrooms around, called the Clitocyb Rivulosa, which is a white all over mushroom that will grow in grassland like this, and they both have what are called decurrent gills. Gills that run down the stem effectively, a bit like the chanterelle, you know, not like your field mushrooms where the gills will just be under the cap, and like you saw on the parasol at the beginning, these gills run down the stem. Now, the Clitocyb Rivulosa, it's whiter under the cap, and that's because it has white spores, but the Miller has pink spores. So if you look at it in the right light, the gills kind of have an almost pinkish hue to them. But, you know, is that enough? Would you be confident just at that? But this isn't the potentially deadly poisonous lookalike? No, me neither, right? There's a few other little features of the Miller. The stem is quite often not in the centre of the cap, like you find with most mushrooms. Let's see if we can get an example of that. So there you go, there's a good example. The stem isn't central on the cap. That's quite often a feature of the Miller as well. But the key thing is the smell. So I'll just break this mushroom up into some little bits and have a good smell and pass it round. And what you'll get is the smell of dough, basically, almost like, well, you know, raw bread. There is another smell that people say is very, very reminiscent of. Wow, there's another mushroom right there. That's really cool. This is such a good day for mushrooms. The other smell, I'm not sure if this is a true scientific term, but people say it's a little bit spermatozoic. Somebody said it already. Wow. Yeah, so it's a bit doughy, basically, is the smell. And that tells me that we've got the Miller here. And because you're here with me and I know what this is, I am 100% confident I'm going to put a few of these Millers in the bag because I really, really like them. I think they're a really tasty edible, and you check every single one just to be sure. Look, there's more pinky. You see the gills there because they've got more spores. They're a bit more pink on this one. But it's still got that doughy smell very pungently.
Is that why it's called the Miller?
Yes, I expect so.
Yes, because if you ever been to a mill that they produce wheat flour, then the wet wheat grain, when it's ground, has this kind of smell. So that's the reason why it is a Miller.
Okay. Yeah. And what was the name of the one that it looks like that's poisonous?
The Clitocyb Rivulosa, which I think is that the Fool's Funnel?
Yeah.
What is it called?
Fool's Funnel.
Yeah. So when it's mature, it tends not to have a cap that goes like this. The funnel caps tend to have more of a funnel cone-shaped cap. But again, mushrooms are so variable depending on the conditions they've grown in. I don't like that as an identifier. The smell is the key identifier. So it's an exciting mushroom because it's got some really poisonous lookalikes and it's really tasty. But it's even more exciting because it's a mushroom that is known to be parasitic on the mycelium of the porcini mushroom.
What, this one?
This is, yes, the Miller, Clitopilus prunulus, I think is its scientific name, and it's parasitic on the mycelium of probably the most sought after mushroom from an edible point of view on the planet, apart from truffles, you know, but I don't even really like truffles that much. They're a bit too musty. So where you find your Millers, you expect to find porcinis. Now, has nobody looked behind me yet?
Yeah, the big thing. What's that one?
Right, let's go over here then. Yeah, watch out for this lovely brown one that I saw there. It has, yes, that's a nice interesting one. Yes, that's not the one I want to talk about though. I'll talk about that in a minute because that is a bit big and old, whereas over here we have got some absolute, here's look, more Millers growing right beside it. Parasitic on the mycelium of our penny bun, or porcini. It's widely known as the porcini in Italy, in France and Spain and Portugal they call it the Grisette. In the UK we call it the penny bun because it looks like a bread roll. Simple as that. Now, it's a mushroom like our Lexinum that has sponge under the cap. That sponge will start off white and it will start to yellow as the mushroom ages. And you can see this has gone a little bit yellow there. Now, it's a mushroom that if I was to cut this in half, it wouldn't stain any colour at all. Remember when I told you about the rules with the Boletus group of mushrooms? What were they? No red, no blue. Yes, exactly. So there's no red on the outside of this, and it certainly would not discolour if I cut it in half, which I'll do in just a second. But for the porcinis, the true porcini, the Boletus edulis, which is what this is, there's one other nice little key identifier in that it has what we call white reticulation. And reticulation is like a netting effect that's pressed onto the, or it looks like it's pressed onto the stem of the mushroom. So what I'll do is come round so you can all have a look. And towards the top, you might be able to see it there most easily. There's like a, almost like a white netting.
Oh, this pattern on
Yeah.
it, and then
And the netting is white on this particular variety. That rules out the only mushroom that passes my red and blue test in this group that you don't want to eat. It's called the bitter bolete. It's not poisonous, but it's awfully bitter. That has dark reticulation. Let's see actually if one of these others has more visible reticulation, because that's in such good condition you can barely see it. Let's try this big fella here. Look at that.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow.
Wow.
Okay, these are starting to go over, so we're lucky we're here today. But yes, the netting, if you couldn't quite see it on that first one, just at the top is most prominent.
This way.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
actually there's the top's the cat, but you can see like a white netting.
Yes, I can see.
All over it, and that netting is white. If that netting was dark, it could be the bitter bolete, or it could be another version of the set called the dark set. But that netting effect there. If you've got that white netting on a mushroom that's brown and looks like this, then it's a porcini. And that's what we've got here. This is probably about, I'd say, a week old, maybe this one. If they're growing in perfect conditions, they can grow very, very quickly. If the conditions change and it dries out, then they'll slow down. And if it gets very cold, they'll slow down. The porcinis don't like it frosty, so, you know, when we get a frost,
And
most
again,
of
would you
these...
take the sponge off?
Well, I would with this one because it's all gone a bit yellow and manky, but where's that other one? What you'll find is that it's quite hard to actually remove the sponge from the porcinis when they're young because it's very tight. And unlike the Lexinums, the sponge on this one still tastes quite good. So on this one here, yes, I would remove that yellow old sponge, but with this one here, I think it might be not worth it just because it's a bit too tricky. So I'll just cut this in half because I'm going to show you the difference between this and the toxic ones again. In fact, I'll get rid of the mud before I do.
Are they the same then over there? Those little ones? Behind the dog?
Yeah. Oh no, they're another different type. So there you go. Nice, beautiful white flesh. No discolouring whatsoever.
Oh, you can see the sponge a bit.
Yeah, and there's the spongy bit. So you could remove it, you know, if you've got loads of... This loves oak and beech and sometimes birch trees and a few others. It's not the fussiest of mushrooms. But if you've got those trees back at your house, then fair enough to take the sponge off. Chuck it all over your garden by those trees and who knows, you might get lucky. But people pay a fortune for this mushroom because they just can't cultivate it, or it's incredibly difficult to cultivate. That's why loads of wild mushrooms are still so expensive, because, you know, mycology is a bit of a frontier science and they haven't even figured out really how to grow chanterelles. It's been done successfully in the past, but only where people have actually literally taken a huge chunk of ground where the chanterelle mycelium is, with, you know, the moss that's there, and transplanted that to somewhere else. You know, so that's why these sorts of mushrooms are so expensive in the shops, because they pretty much literally have to be foraged. Now, if you find 3 or 4 porcinis like this, it's a pretty good day. If you find 3 or 4 porcinis with some hedgehogs, a couple of types of chanterelles, then it's a really good day. But what I'm about to show you in just a minute when we get into the next field is what makes this probably my best foraging course that I've ever run, because I've never seen anything quite like it before. I'm just going to collect these and we'll all go into the field together. There's 1 or 2 more mushrooms I want to show you. This is yeah, I'm gonna, yeah, I'll get to that in just a second.
I'm just trying to work out, is that a small one of these?
Well, I'll use that one down there to test you as to whether you were listening to me earlier. So you've gone and done it now. Right, get rid of that. If there were any holes in the base of the stem, then you'd expect there to be maggots in this mushroom, but there aren't any, so that means that these are still in really good condition. And I'll just get rid of that yellow sponge off of this one, and we're going to collect up a few more of these for the meal at the end. If I was drying this, then I might not take the sponge off. It's going to be cooked fresh.
Like,
and
even though it's yellow?
Yeah, if I was drying it, I'd still consider that.
Would you remove it afterwards then? When it's
No,
dry?
just dry it, with the sponge attached. Right, so this big one.
And then eat it, the sponge?
Yeah, absolutely. But we're just going to be cooking these fresh today, so I don't want that bit, basically. Chuck him at the nearest big oak tree, and as you can see, we've got this one, the one I've put in my bag. I don't know if you want to follow me a little bit here, Jordan. One there. These very good looking ones here. The base of one that Rupert picked there. A couple more over here. And something over here that looks a little bit different. No, it's just another porcini, another one right there. Another couple here, some more behind the fence there. So there's probably about 40 in this little area, plus our millers, which I really, really like. And another mushroom just over here. Sorry, what was your name, roughly? Heather. Now this mushroom down here I've already spoken about already, so would you mind picking it and telling me what it is?
We get down to these, yeah?
Yep. Okay, speak up.
No, anyone want to tell me what that is? Yeah, sure. Well, I suggest you go home and look it up.
Right, okay. So it's clearly one of the Boletus group with the sponge under the cap.
Yes.
The rules are simple with that group: no red, no blue. But there's one section of that group that we've already met, the Lexinums, and they all have that dirty, scurfy stem. So show everyone that. Obviously, Heather knew this from the very beginning. Yes. She was testing you all there. So this is another Lexinum scaprum. Yes. And now we've picked it, it's going to go in the bag. Although when you've got a bag or a field of porcinis, you normally leave the Lexinums behind. There you go. So with this one, because the sponge is certainly not something that I want off of this particular variety, I'm going to take it off again and have a look around for the nearest birch tree and throw it over there. So that's a few porcinis, and Attila's got something else over here that he wants me to talk about. What's this?
White porcini, it was coloured, so it has no coloration on the cap. So it is a tricky one.
Well, it's quite frequent actually that very young porcinis will be white. It doesn't only happen when they're published, in my experience, but when they're very young, they can be white. So that is a baby porcini there, which will get brown as it matures, which is a lovely little find. and shows that this patch is still fruiting and still going for it. Rupert was saying that he's been picking these here for a couple of weeks already. As long as the conditions stay correct. Now for these, they do not survive a frost. So after a frost, the Porcinis, the penny buns I should call them, they kind of go to sleep. Right, now over here, we've got a really beautiful, interesting little mushroom in a genus that is a no-no for foragers, and it's also one that scares the life out of mycologists as well, because it's one of the biggest genre or genuses of mushrooms around, and it's particularly confusing because there are literally hundreds of Cortinarius or Webcaps, which is what I hope this is, because I've said it, and we'll have a look. And yes, now that's a really, really good example of why they're called the Webcaps.
Yeah.
You can see when they're young, the stem is attached to the cap by almost a cobweb-like structure. You'll see that there? Now, as this mushroom matures, the cap will open, that cobweb will disappear entirely, and all you'll get left with occasionally is a faint brown stain on the skirt, if you like, where that cobweb was, because they've got brown spores, and that will drop onto that bit of the remains of the cobweb. Now, this one is actually an edible member of the genus, but it's not particularly nice. I believe this one, although it's a very confusing genus, to be the bruising webcap. Cortinarius, is it the purpurascens? Is that the right one for this?
I hardly can say compare the common names with the scientific names.
Okay, right, see, I told you this genus even scares mycologists. So there's hundreds of them in the UK, and quite often they just fall into the unknown category, even for experienced foragers. You know, I'll often be out, and if I see a mushroom that might have a faint bit of brown on the stem where the webbing used to be, we just leave them all behind. We leave all of the Cortinarius behind. This is a striking coloured one, beautiful purple coloured one, but they come in all shapes and all, well, not all shapes, obviously they're all mushroom shaped, all sizes and all different colours, and some of them are deadly poisonous. The deadly webcap, for example, is a deadly poisonous member of this genus. So really, when they're young you can ID them, but when they're older, really they're just mushrooms that you walk past knowing that it would be a very difficult job to even get close to IDing them to species. And as a forager, I want mushrooms that I can ID in the field through macroscopic features that don't require me to do chemical tests or take them home and look at them under a microscope to figure out whether they're edible or not. I want to be able to ID my mushroom in the field and take it home if it's edible. This is a group of mushrooms where that just simply isn't possible, probably even for the most experienced mycologist in the Cortinarius genus around. I think John Wright, you know, the River Cottage forager, lovely, lovely fella, I think in his book, if I remember it rightly, he says something like, try to learn the Cortinarius, that way will lend you or lead you to madness. So that's how confusing a group of mushrooms these are. Just remember the webcaps. If you see that spider's web effect, just leave the mushroom behind. Right, now let's head this way. Where's my red bag? You got it, thank you, Attila. So we're going to see some more things quickly, and then I'm going to have to dash down and start cooking. Okay, right, everyone gather round over here, because we're just going to go into a bit more detail on those bolete group, the bolete group of mushrooms. And down here we've got a different type, one that has red on the pores. Remember when I said the poisonous ones? They're not subtle. about their red and their blue. This is not one of the poisonous ones, funnily enough, but it's exhibiting all of the characteristics, or the simple characteristics that the poisonous boletes do. So first of all, red pores and a reddish tinge to the stem. Now this one I know to be the Scarletina Bolete. I know that by a very small detail in that it's got dots on the stem. It's called the dotted stem bolete. Remember with the Porcini, the penny bun, it was reticulation, which is netting. With the Scarletina, what you have is quite hard to discern dots on the stem instead. Little red dots. See those there? But really, you know, you have to know what you're looking for, really. It's not like they're very obvious, but those dots, to the trained eye, I suppose, tell you that it's a Scarletina. If this was the devil's bolete, it would have reticulation on the stem. The poisonous ones have reticulation, whereas this has little dots. But it's hard to tell they're dots, you know. So this is, well, this one isn't poisonous, no. But for a beginner, this is one that I'd leave behind until you really are confident in what you're doing. So, what were the rules with the boletus group? Yay! That sounded a bit more confident. I like it. So there's the red. I'll show you the blue now because, like I said, it's not a subtle thing. In fact, as soon as I took it apart too slowly. The flesh of this mushroom is actually yellow, and over the next 20 minutes to half an hour it will go back to yellow. But as soon as it was exposed to air, it went very violent, or at least I hope it did. Yeah, it did. Went very violently blue. Okay.
Take it out the water, it's yellow, and it oxidises with the air.
Might be a very similar chemical in here then. Now this one is actually going into the bag because you're with me and Attila and Jordan, and we all know what this is. But as a beginner, stay away from these ones. Just stick to the Porcinis. You know, you're not missing much. I find this as good as the Porcini personally. It does need to be well cooked. So you can eat the Porcini. You can actually eat bits of that raw if you want to. You have to cook this mushroom, and just for safety's sake, I advise people to cook all their wild mushrooms before they eat them. So remember that, no red, no blue, sponge under the cap, and you're perfectly safe. But this one is an edible one anyway, the Scarletina Bolete. Right, now guys, we're just going to head up this way, and you'll see why this is the special day that I was talking about. Jordan, if you'd like to zoom in on what we've got here, we've got a field absolutely covered in more Porcini mushrooms, more penny buns than I've ever seen in one place before in my life. Keep coming this way, guys. We've got another mushroom to talk about in a little while. Look at that perfect one there. Oh, he's had a little nibble out of him. More here, more up there. A lovely one there. Look at this. Oh, broke that one. That's going in the bag. Oh, there's another one that's been broken by something. And just in case you hadn't seen enough penny buns, we have all of those there, all of these here. Keep walking, Jordan. Some awful beast has trodden on one here, and we'll keep going down. When we came up here earlier on, I honestly couldn't stop laughing for about 10 minutes. Keep walking, keep walking. Keep walking. And here we've got some more beautiful specimens, and probably, I think, almost the most perfect one of all at the very end. That is a true fat-bottomed poster boy porcini mushroom, and you, Mr. Slug, are not having it, nor you. Okay, there's plenty more for you in the field though. Right, now we're going to finish here on one more mushroom, which is a really good mushroom to know. So this is a field full of porcinis, the likes of which I have never seen before in my life, which makes it a little bit ironic that we're going to finish on a poisonous mushroom down here. So what we've got down here is another mushroom that I really like finding. You know, we found that stilted earth ball, and around here, oh, what's over there?
One of those little bars, white.
The speckly ones. Is that a little baby? Right, okay, so this is a really lovely find for me as someone who loves mushrooms. It's a mushroom called the Panther Cat, or at least I think it's the Panther Cat. We'll find out when we look underneath it. But you can see there it's got those key characteristics of the Amanita family, you know, the death cap family, the fly agaric family, like that red one we looked at earlier. And this one's got speckles on the cap, and the speckles on the cap of this one are particularly vibrant white compared to its lookalikes. There's a few others in the genus that can look similar, the blusher and the Amanita excelsa, the grey spotted Amanita. But with the Panther Cat, the speckles are nice and white. Now, if I do what I did with the other one, what you want to do with your mushrooms to ID them is get your knife in about an inch away and lever them out the ground, not pop them out the ground like that. And what you see with the Panther Cat is all of those features. So there's the egg sac that it grew from. It's got those white gills that I talked about that are on the vast majority of Amanitas, slightly orangey gills on the Crocea and a couple of others, but white to whitish on all of them. And this one has a very distinctive skirt that normally sticks out almost horizontally, like a rah-rah skirt, you know, not like a pleated A-line, I suppose, which is what you get on the lookalikes. And this is a mushroom that has all the same properties as the red one with white spots that we saw earlier, the fly agaric. It's much less common though, and it's a really well presented mushroom. It's always much neater than all of its lookalikes, if you like. It looks like it's been to the salon before you get there. Am I being weird? I suppose I am a little bit. Anyway, I always find this, I think this is a beautiful mushroom basically, but it's more toxic apparently than the fly agaric. I do know of people that have spoken online about their experiences of eating this mushroom for hallucinogenic reasons, and apparently it's not a particularly pleasant experience with this mushroom, and you do get quite sick with it. So I certainly do not recommend that. And also if you boil it, like I said, in Europe, in certain parts of Europe, they'll boil the fly agaric, throw the water away and then eat it, and it doesn't have those poisonous and hallucinogenic properties. You can potentially do the same with this one as well, but I never have, and I can pretty safely say I never will. Like I said, if I need to boil a mushroom to make it edible, I'm generally not going to do it. And when I'm in a field with probably 50 kilos of porcini mushrooms, and I've got a bag with chanterelles and amethyst chanterelles and hedgehogs and other things in it, then most definitely the Panther Cat gets left behind. Now, this is an unusual day because this is a foraging course. We don't ever take people out on foraging group expeditions because we don't like going and stripping the woods bare of mushrooms. We like to stick to our sort of 1.5 kilo rule. But today's a little bit different. We're on private property and we have the landowner's full permission because of how many there are. We have permission for each one of you to find yourself the most beautiful porcini that you can find and take it home with you today. So find a real poster boy and keep it in your hands, because
So pretty, aren't they? Incredible. Slightly movie top. Oh, I'm smiling.
Yeah, there's plates here. What to do is take a couple of bits of the French stick, the tiger loaf, and Jordan has kindly made us some pickled porcinis, which are not to everyone's taste, but I think they're lovely, so give them a try. And this is wild mushroom and cashew nut pate, which I made with red split lentils, which gives it that kind of pate texture. And the cashew nuts add a little bit of a sweet side, and the mushrooms are all the wild ones that we've been talking about. So lots of parasols in there and a few dried porcinis and things like that. So grab a couple of bits of bread, help yourself to a pickled porcini, and then the bread is just really a boat for the pate. So get a good dollop of the pate and the sorrels on there too. And I'll
say the foraging was great, but the food was even better.
Thank you. What's the name?
Amanda. We've had a wonderful day today. It's for my birthday, so it was a surprise, but my favourite is mushrooms. So I've had a fantastic day. It's been very
fungy-tastic day.
Really good. Yeah, lovely meal at the end of it. So
Brilliant, absolutely special.
Great.
Thank you. So there you go. I really hope you enjoyed that video. Don't expect to find that many penny buns on a normal Wild Foods UK course. That was a very special day. But we do talk about that kind of variety of species on any normal mushroom foraging course. I really hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll do another one as soon as I can.